right. Welcome to another segment of Lore You Should Know. I am Greg Tito, and I am joined today by Mr. Chris Perkins. Hello.
Greetings.
Today on this segment, where we like to delve into a specific topic of D&D lore just for fun and games, or to use in an applicable way in your dungeon mastering, we are going to talk about Duergar, which you may not realize was pronounced that way. It took me a while to really kind of suss out how to pronounce Duergar. I think I said Dowergar or some other messed up pronunciation. But am I doing it correctly?
It actually has two canonical pronunciations.
What is that?
Unusual. One is Duergar. The other is Duergar.
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 Duergar. Yeah. Do you have to say it with a bit of an accent?
So one goes from like three syllables, Duergar, to Duergar. Yeah.
Excellent.
And you can say it with a bit of an accent. I think that's cool.
Yeah, right. It feels right. And they are dwarves that have lived in the Underdark for ages.
They're dwarves that went bad in the Underdark. Yeah. So theirs is a sad tale. They were dwarves who were basically enslaved by mind flayers for a very, 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 very long time. And as you know, any race that is enslaved by mind flayers doesn't come out of that not having been fundamentally transformed.
Mm-hmm.
So Duergar have gray skin and a very sober, somber, grim outlook on life. Their freedom was hard fought, but the mind flayers basically stole from the Duergar their imagination and their love of craft.
Oh.
And so imagine a dwarf who is bereft of inspiration and joy, who basically toils and works only because that's all they can do, and because their greed and their desire for quantity over quality sort of propels them through life. These Duergar are unhappy. They revel in their unhappiness in a way. They just cannot experience joy. It is completely absent from their culture. It is absent from everything you see in their culture. They have a very functional aspect to everything that they produce and no real aesthetic to it. So if you take all artistry and compassion and passion out of dwarves, what you're left with is Duergar. Now, they did get something from the mind flayers that they didn't have before, which was psionics.
Right.
Duergar first appeared in the first edition Monster Manual 2. And in those old stats for monsters, the bottom line was always a line about psionics. And this was one of the first sort of bipedal races that kind of leaned heavily into the psionics system. And of course, the mind flayers gave Duergar psionics to make them more useful as thralls. But ultimately, it was that psionic talents that kind of propelled the Duergar toward freedom as well. Among their things that they could psionically do to themselves were turn themselves invisible. They could also enlarge to ogre size, making them even more formidable as shock troops and combatants.
And they do that psionically, not through magic?
Psionics
magic
is a version of magic, sort of skinned in a certain way, and magic of the mind. But basically, that's what they're doing. They're physically altering themselves psionically.
Wow.
They also can have other psionic capabilities as well, and psionic powers, similar to the way a lot of mind flayers do, although those can be customized from Duergar to Duergar. They also have resistance to certain magic to make them more effective as shock troops and warriors. But the two things that most people know about Duergar in terms of their abilities is their ability to turn invisible and their ability to assume large size.
And having a foe in relatively low level D&D that is always invisible or always has the ability to turn invisible is really terrifying, right? Because you're always like, who knows what is around.
Yeah, it's good for Duergar because they can insinuate them. So they can make their way through the Underdark and get, slip past things that they don't want to fight, but they can also slip into settlements, drow settlements or underground other settlements. They can make their way to the surface, although they're not prone to, because Duergar have sunlight sensitivity, as a lot of Underdark races do. The sunlight hurts them, not wounds them, but it annoys them enough that they don't tend to go out.
Yeah.
They're very much entrenched in the darkest corners of the Underdark, where they build cities. Forgotten Realms has a number of noteworthy ones. We showcased one in Out of the Abyss, a 5th edition adventure set in the Underdark.
Cracklestuck.
That's it.
Yes.
Yep. Exactly. And there's a big red dragon who lives in there with them.
Do they usually have affinity to dragons, or is that unique?
That's sort of unique to Gracklestug. But Duergar there's a level of pragmatism to them. If they know there's a big dragon living nearby, they will either try to leverage that for their own gain or learn to abide by it. In the case of the dragon Thembershad, they feed it and it helps fuel their furnaces.
Did when the Mind Flayers enslaved them, were they primarily used as shock troops? Were they a military enslavement?
They were both used for military purposes and for construction purposes. I mean, if you needed hard labor done or anything like that, Duergar, they have strong backs, strong arms. They can toil endlessly, and so they did.
You mentioned the lack of craft, though, so that they were just unimaginative in their architecture.
Well, that was bled out of them by the Mind Flayers.
Oh, so it was like a more of we only encouraged these types of characteristics to procreate. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Ugh.
And so any creativity they had before they were enslaved just disappeared. Now, ultimately, freedom was gained with the Duergar themselves. Have a very similar story to the Gith. The Gith were liberated by a champion. Basically, they had to have a messiah figure rise up in their ranks and lead them to freedom. In Gith society, that was the champion Gith, who basically led the Gith to freedom. And then later, the Gith split into the two fractious races, Githyanki and Githzerai. Duergar had their own liberator, who was a sort of demigod-like figure named Ladogwr. And Ladogwr would not only lead the Duergar to freedom, but also then become this sort of worshipped as a god figure and was basically elevated to godhood by that act.
Is he still operating as a demigod?
Yeah, well, now basically has with all the worship of Duergar behind him is now a full-fledged god. There are two Duergar gods of note, both of which are described in Volo's Guide to Monsters. The other is Deep Duerra, who was Ladogwr's lieutenant, basically, through this
time
resistance,
the revolt.
Yes. But she was her portfolio when she became a lesser god under Ladogwr. Her portfolio is basically the extermination of Mind Flayers and the development of your psionic potential. So the two of them basically are the core two deities of Duergar. Duergar are not religious as a general thing. Although they have these gods, they don't practice or revere them in the usual way. They're just super powerful figures that the Duergar respect and honor, and owe their freedom to, in a way.
How did Deep Duerra get her moniker there? Like deep, is it just because it's from the deeps, or you have to call upon your psionics from the deeps, or is it just a cool name?
That is a very good question. We don't say, I don't think, where her name comes from.
It's evocative, though. I just like that it's like she's not just Duerra, she's Deep Duerra.
Deep Duerra.
How deep?
She's very deep.
Yeah.
Everything about Duergar is deep down. I mean, Ladogwr is known as the Grim One. She doesn't have a particular moniker besides Deep Duerra. She's just always been called that. I don't know why. I suspect Deep is not actually part of her name. It's just they refer to her as that because um, she's with them
She's from the
in
deeps.
mind and spirit. She is from the deeps.
Yeah.
Um,
It's fascinating. I like the
yeah.
idea of a kind of version of dwarf, because we often see, uh, the evil versions of humans, evil versions of
Mm-hmm.
elves, and blah blah, and then having these as a cheerless, unhappy version is almost, not to mention their abilities, just kind of terrifying. It's like, oh yeah, could you imagine
Yeah.
living in such a place that was free of joy? And part of me, because in Duergar you said was what, it was the second monster manual, so was that like 75?
The second Monster Manual, no, I think that released in like 80 or 81, but I
Oh,
have to double
okay.
check.
Well, the reason I ask that is because it feels, and here you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels very Cold War, these Duergar. It feels
Mm.
like probably misconception, but it feels like the way we were taught about Soviet culture, in a way that there was.
Yeah, sort of the brutalism and the sort of the starkness of or the devaluation of art and the working as uh, sort of a functioning unit, just sort of getting by. Uh, it's there's definitely aspects to that. I like the Soviet analogy. That's a pretty good one actually. And there there's also a thing about Duergar that they can never have enough. They want
Mm,
more treasure, but the treasure doesn't give them pleasure. It just they want it. It makes them it makes them very much hated
mm.
among all other races in the Underdark because they just conquer and take, and it's never enough. So they conquer more and they take more and never enough. It's like they're just reaching for that, looking for that rush or that pleasure moment, and then never being able to get there
Mm.
because life is all about toil and they can never be satisfied with anything.
Wow. I kind of want to invite a Duergar to a party and cheer him up a little bit.
Indeed, yes. Now, your chances of encountering a Duergar if you're not in the Underdark are pretty slim. Um,
Yeah,
but if you're running an under,
they don't travel to the surface very often, right?
no, they don't. And so, but if you are running an Underdark campaign or a campaign that has like subterranean dwarven enclaves in the mountains and things like that, the Duergar menace is a real one, and it can be frightful to have to deal with them because, like you say, their invisibility
Hmm.
is certainly working to their advantage. The fact that they can become these big hulking juggernauts enlarged makes them tremendously frightful.
Right, because they can sneak in anywhere, and then all of a sudden they're these huge monsters that you have to deal
Yeah.
with, and it's that
Yes.
that juxtaposition is really kind of cool. I also like the idea of using them in a campaign or in an adventure, that is encased like in a bottle episode or something like that, and you know that there's a Duergar with you trapped somewhere, and how do you
Mm.
deal with that? Almost like an Alien, the movie Alien situation.
Right. Yes. Yes. Another thing you can do is like there's like a murderer in a dwarven stronghold, and you don't know who it is, and it turns out to be a Duergar who's basically infiltrated the place. Now, in Volo's guide, we introduce Duergar with optional psionic powers such as, instead of the ability to enlarge, the ability to shrink down to like mouse size, which is great if you're a Duergar spy
Yeah.
and you want to stay in a place for a long time and not be noticed and sort of crawl through the vents and ducts of a Duergar stronghold. A saboteur would also find that ability useful.
Honey, I
There's a
Shrunk the Duergar.
exactly nice, and then on top of that, we've also introduced these idea of Duergar fused with machinery.
Mm.
That is, Duergar who have basically been stuck inside golem-like creatures and power them with their own bodies, like the movie Aliens, that ancient film about you know uh,
Yeah, where she's got the power loader.
she's got the power loader.
Get away from her, you bitch.
Imagine a smaller version of that has a Duergar inside it, but functionally operates the same way with big tools, hammers and drills and things attached to it. Duergar are fond of making these sort of heavy industrial machines, but in order to power them, they have to basically, the Duergar has to be put in against its will and shackled and basically pinned in with like spikes in its flesh, so that its pain is what drives the machine. And we've got
Chris, I feel terrible
exactly.
now.
Exactly. So in Boloskai, there are a couple monsters like this, which are a fusion of Duergar and Construct. And of course, they're used for all the heavy lifting jobs and crap jobs and things like that. And they really have no choice. So it's like the Duergar didn't learn, they got their freedom, but they didn't learn the lessons of being enslaved by the Mind Flayers. They're as bad as their former masters.
Right. And now they're just doing these tortures to themselves, or,
and to others potentially, but mostly to themselves.
Yeah.
They don't do it too much to others because they can't stand the company of others. So they have to do it to themselves anyway. They're
antisocial down to their core.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's very little redeeming, although you can play Duergar characters, but I think if you're a character who's a Duergar, and you're not somber and dour in nature, then you were probably not raised in Duergar society. There's probably some story there of you having been distanced from that culture.
Yeah, I could definitely see a campaign or a character or a player wanting to play against type, and then try to figure out what is this nurture or this is nature. What makes the core of your being. That's a lot of D&D stories out there, but I think I haven't seen many people do that with Duergar, so that'd be interesting.
Right. Yes. And they really are a sad tale, because they are very much victims, but at the same time they're just propagating this endless cycle of dreariness and misery. And maybe it would take a new god or a new champion to break them out of their funk, but it would have to be pretty significant. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that in 4th edition we kind of messed with Duergar a little bit.
I don't remember. What did we do to Duergar?
First thing we did is we gave them beard quills.
Like they can use their beard as quills?
Yeah, they've got, well, not writing quills, but like porcupine quills.
Oh, okay.
And that they could basically fire quills out of their beards.
Like they're manticores, like that kind of attack?
Exactly. So that was weird. But we did it. So that's something to play with if you're so inclined. The other thing we did, which is a little less bizarre, is we very much leaned into this idea that Asmodeus has taken a personal interest in the Duergar and sees them as ripe for devilish infiltration. Duergar, lawful evil.
Yeah, they
tend to be tyrants in a lot of ways, and so Asmodeus is lawful evil. And there
seems like some synergy there.
There is this notion that Asmodeus has been for some time impersonating Ladogor.
Oh.
That the Duergar god is in fact Asmodeus now.
Huh.
Like the real Ladogor is locked up somewhere or chained in the bowels of hell. And whenever Ladogor is worshipped or called upon, it is in fact Asmodeus answering the call. It is Asmodeus granting spells. It is Asmodeus doing all the godly things and driving the Duergar toward a purpose. And I think that's pretty cool.
That is interesting, because then you're like, what about, then is Deep Duerra going to be the hero? Or, is Possibly. She going to have to save her old paramour?
Potentially.
Yeah.
There's a whole bit there. And the idea that, maybe there are even Duergar who kind of know that Asmodeus is running the show now, but they've basically they don't, because he's made deals with them.
Yeah.
They can summon devils now, or they can channel fiendish power from the 9 hells. Yeah, they're all for it. So there's that sort of corruptive element that could run through a Duergar storyline, which is fascinating.
Yeah, and it could be, and alongside what's happening with Descent into Avernus, right? I mean, it's very much in
Oh,
line.
absolutely, absolutely, yes.
Cool. Well, that feels even more Soviet to a certain extent. That there's this corrupting influence, and you were saying like what would be the thing that would change them, and maybe someone runs a Chernobyl like accident happens, and
That's
that
fantastic.
changes everything about their society based on this event. And part of me wants to think that the dragon that we dramatized in Out of the Abyss, Thermashad.
Embershout.
Thundershout. Yeah, maybe that causes some type of thing that occurs, and everyone kind of changes after that. And I would love to see
Yeah,
that too.
there's already this concept of in the Underdark the Faerzris, which is this kind of Underdark radiation. Maybe they try to channel that or infuse that into their factories and items, or they
Mm-hmm.
start hoarding it and siphoning it off, and it just catalyzes with something in an unexpected way, and suddenly you've got this phasers induced radioactive explosion that becomes Chernobyl of the Underdark. I think that's a fantastic idea for a story.
I love it. Awesome. All right. Well, we'll get Craig Mazin on it right away. How can people get in touch with you, Chris, and hopefully cheer you up after talking about Duergar?
Good question. I am on Twitter at Chris Perkins DND.
Excellent. Awesome. Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be able to speak with you. And it looks like you're having a grand old time with your bookshelves behind you. And I love that you have the dungeon magazines that you often refer to on these segments. Now you have them at your fingertips.
I do. In fact, I just unpacked those recently just to
Nice.
clear some stuff out of my garage.
Excellent. Now I need to do my
Yeah.
go gadget arms and pick up the all the adventures I have
Nice.
behind me and
Yes.
start thumbing through them. All right. Well, thank you so much. We'll be back with some more lore you should know in the future.